Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, July 4th, 2024. Happy Independence Day. Happy 4th of July. Today we are going to be talking about a 538 forecast that was released earlier on this morning, questioning, would Kamala Harris be a stronger candidate than Biden? And now we've been talking about this quite extensively over the past 2 days, with the conversation gearing around whether or not President Biden will be replaced at the top of the ticket and whether or not Kamala Harris would actually suit to be a better placed nominee in the eventual general election. And that comes with a lot of questions, a lot of risks, a lot of reward potentially, and Democrats have been trying to figure out what makes sense, and does she ultimately have a better pathway to victory? So 538 decided to apply their model that they apply to President Biden, this time with Kamala Harris, with some fundamental factors, with polling factors, economic factors, pretty much giving her the same treatment that President Biden has and throwing her into the model. And to put things into perspective, right now the 538 model gives Trump and Biden about an even chance at victory. Donald Trump has the upper hand, 53%, to Joe Biden's 47%. And so clearly a slight advantage for Donald Trump, but nothing super significant. What we're going to look at is, again, the same exact model applied to Vice President Harris, taking a look at, hey, what does it look like on the head-to-head matchup between Biden, Trump, and Harris and Trump, and who actually performs better? Now, to give you a bit of context that I think is necessary, on the national level in a 2024 hypothetical matchup, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, Trump leads by 2. Against Joe Biden, Trump leads by 3. And so it's a roughly 1-point advantage here we're seeing decreased and cut off of Trump's margin when Kamala Harris is at the nominating ticket. However, we still have to keep in mind that either way, this is still a Trump presidency. This is still a Trump victory. If he actually does win the popular vote by 3 points against Biden, he wins the Electoral College. If he wins the popular vote by 2 points against Kamala Harris, he wins the election. And so there really isn't that many ways that we can cut this to say that, this lead here for Donald Trump means that he loses the election, because that isn't what's going to happen. At least not right now. What we're more focused on is this difference. Kamala Harris seemingly receives more support than Joe Biden on the national level. Right now, Joe Biden is at 43.8% nationwide. Kamala Harris is at 44%. Up against her as well, Donald Trump only peaks at 46%. Against Biden, he peaks at 47%. And so it just goes to show that there are marginal, but something significant enough for us to mention it, significant enough numbers that tell us that there is an improvement when it comes down to nominating Kamala Harris on the national level. But 538's forecast decides to dive a little bit deeper than that. Before we get into that too, I want to show you my most recent election predictions between Joe Biden, Donald Trump, and Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. In a Biden v. Trump rematch, Biden gets 226 electoral votes, Trump receives 312. Against Kamala Harris, Trump receives 291, still a victory, still 4 more years of a Trump presidency, to Kamala Harris's 247. Now, in both circumstances, the election is still pretty strong for the Republican Party. They win the presidency and with it the Senate and potentially even the House. With Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, the result doesn't seem to be changing. But some of these down-ballot measurements and some of these down-ballot races could stand to benefit, as of right now, with a Kamala Harris nomination. But some of these national numbers don't tell the full story. We just saw a poll today from JL Partners and the Daily Mail that shows Donald Trump with an 11-point margin of victory over Kamala Harris. The same group of people choosing Trump by just 5 over Joe Biden. It's interesting to see things like this because for a while we've been told on this narrative, at least the past week, since the debate, that Harris would be a suitable, if not better, replacement for President Biden. But now we're starting to see pushback on that. And this 538 forecast actually agrees with the sentiment you see on the screen right now. So 538 decided to break it down in 2 ways. Unfortunately, my webpage here doesn't like to load the actual breakdown of some of these, a polls-only forecast and an all-taken-into-account forecast. So I decided to go on my phone, screenshot it, and allow us to unpack it here. On the baseline of polls alone, they unpack this in the article. You can take a step and take a look at it. And they mention that Kamala Harris is, in fact, polling, in most cases, better than Biden in a head-to-head matchup when it comes down to the national figures. And with that being said, just alone, Kamala Harris has a 38% chance at winning the Electoral College to Joe Biden's 35%. And so what I wanted to look at was based on the polls alone, just based on very few data points that we're working with right now. And to be fair, this forecast has not taken into account the JL Partners poll that has been released. It has not taken into account the Democratic Party sort of recoalescing around President Biden. But again, that's yet to be seen because many congressional Democrats still seem to be on the fence right now. The polls alone just give us a better understanding of, with the few data points that we have right now, what does it tell us about the state of the race? And now the interesting thing is that Biden does better in some states and Harris does better in others. And we'll look at those right now. What we're looking at on this map here are states where Kamala Harris does better and where Joe Biden does better. So in Arizona, Biden does better. But in Georgia, Harris does better. Let's characterize that. Georgia, Harris, Biden, Arizona. This is a bit confusing. Let's go ahead and cut off another color from Kamala Harris to make this a little bit more understandable so we can really see the duality of the blue. Moving on to Michigan and Nevada, Harris does better in Nevada. Also better in Michigan. Let's take a look at that. Better in Michigan, better in Nevada. Starting to see where this divide comes through. But in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, Biden does better. And so this is where you see something sort of similar happen where, maybe Kamala Harris doing better in Michigan would help her win the state. Doing better in Nevada would help her win the state. What does it look like on my electoral map? I have Biden losing Michigan and Nevada, but I have Harris winning them. Now, I didn't see the 538 forecast before it was released. It was released this morning. I made this video yesterday, but I do think that is largely based on what we've seen from these national polls. But I talked about it in the grand scheme of things too, and 538 doesn't necessarily agree with my map. Now, I recognize that they have far more data points and a far stronger model than what I would eventually put out this coming November. I'm going to admit that because I think it's true. At the same time, we do agree on some ends, and this is one of those, where Michigan and Nevada are two states where I do believe Kamala Harris has a higher chance at victory, and I do think she would win them if the election was held today. I mentioned Michigan, at her the fact that she is more, apathetic to, different regions of the country. I also think, or not apathetic, just that she inspires different regions of the country that are more apathetic towards a Biden nomination. At the same time, I think that, Kamala Harris comes into this election just with a more revitalized spirit from the West. Nevada comes into that. Not to mention the fact that you see that she does in fact do better amongst minority voters in some of the few data points we have right now. What we saw in 2020 was that she added a lot to the ticket in that way. And so when you're thinking about areas where it's on the tipping point, like in my Biden versus Trump head-to-head, like Michigan, where it was tilt red, Nevada, which was lean red, it's reasonable to see how it moves over. Moving past that point, Michigan, Nevada, pretty strong for Kamala Harris if you're comparing it just based on the polls alone. But that isn't everything. 538 has also decided to unpack it with far more than just the polls. And they get into this here. They talk about economic indicators. They talk about things that are related to incumbency advantage. They also talk about the fact that the popular vote edge is almost entirely negated by the bigger electoral college bias against her. While the polls only forecast, showing Biden against Trump, Biden only needs to win the popular vote by 1.1% to win the presidency. That's because he does better in Pennsylvania, which is the likeliest tipping point state in the model, which makes sense. 19 electoral votes, huge electoral prize. Democrats, Republicans are going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars winning it. Harris, by contrast, would need to win the popular vote by 3.5 to 4 points, bigger than what Hillary Clinton had in 2016, but slightly smaller than Biden in 2020, but necessary. 3.5 to 4 points to win Pennsylvania and with the electoral college. So then you throw into things that are not just polling. Non-polling economic and political variables. This is what 538 calls fundamentals. And so when they go through the fundamentals, they look at more than just the polling averages. They look at many other things too. This could be things such as jobs, spending, personal income, manufacturing, inflation, average real wages, housing construction, real sales for manufacturing and trade goods, stock market, a lot of these different things. Why? Because these economic conditions absolutely matter. And it isn't just that too. Political fundamentals, talking about incumbency, talking about past elections, talking about midterms, talking about what's happening here with home state advantages, talking about what's happening here with regional advantages. There are a lot of things being kept in mind when you look at the factors extending beyond the polls. And this is the forecast they come up with. Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin put Biden all together at a 48% chance of victory in the Electoral College even today. Kamala Harris, 31%. In every single state that Harris does better on the polls alone, Biden does better in terms of overall fundamentals. When the model takes into account things extending beyond these head-to-head matchups that we're looking at, or a few of these statewide matchups, you actually find that Biden does do better in these states. And I know you might be viewing this, as the viewer might be disagreeing with this. The vibes might say that Kamala Harris would do better. When you see Bernie bros and centrist Democrats agreeing on Twitter that Kamala Harris would do better, you'd think that would be the truth. But 538 seems to suggest something different. And I don't entirely disagree. I do think that at this moment, Kamala Harris would meet it, to this point, to 247 electoral votes. That Biden would be at 226. However, I think when you get to November, the chance of victory for Kamala Harris actually is smaller than President Biden's. And that is the major difference. That Joe Biden could do better, but he isn't right now. That Kamala Harris does have a chance at victory, but overall net is smaller than Biden's. But maybe that's a risk worth taking, because it really just depends on who's looking at it from the perspective of Democrats on both sides. If they're pro-Harris, if they're pro-Biden, they're going to take a look at this and say, maybe it makes sense to go with her because Biden is only going to depreciate when it comes down to national polls and statewide polls. And in a way, that could be correct. At the same time, Harris might tap out at 247, might top out at 260, depending on what states and districts she wins. And so there's a lot of risk and a lot here that Democrats have to take into consideration. And 538 didn't exactly make it that much easier for those who want to move over to Kamala Harris. And that's also going to be something too. The messaging on this is going to be very difficult. Looking at this from the outside perspective, it has never happened that some party nominee would be replaced this close to the election. I think that's a big problem. Everyone's going to take a look at this and say, what the hell happened in 10 years from now? And people just don't really realize that at the same time, this is an question that people are going to have right now. It may be a question for the history books and the way that Wikipedia reports on it, and it gets into the textbooks in third grade social studies classes, but it's also going to be a question that American voters are going to ask at this moment. Why is Biden being swapped out, and why is Kamala Harris being moved up? In the direct line of succession, sure, that makes sense. But it doesn't always make that much sense to the average voter who might be looking at this and saying, we should have a primary between now and the convention. We should be in a better position to choose who our nominee is if I'm a registered Democrat, and I don't want it to just be handpicked for somebody. And obviously, there's a lot more things taken into consideration. Financial laws, ballot laws, all of these different things are absolutely points that, we can look at and say, this makes sense from the hyper-political lens. But a lot of voters are going to want an answer for this, and it's not always going to be easy to explain it to them, which is another reason why I don't think that this hurdle is actually going to be crossed. Biden having overall better odds too just doesn't help the cause. This model here did not help the people that are talking about how all of a sudden, they're pro-Kamala Harris. That's a question too. There is so much, genuinely so much, and I say this earnestly because there's so much that needs to be answered before a decision like this is made. It might seem that this is the right choice, but also Biden could be the better choice in the long run. I don't know. 538 has an answer, though, that Biden has better odds than Harris overall. And we should, in a way, take that into account. And so should Democratic Party leadership, but they aren't the only ones that matter in this circumstance. And maybe in a scenario where Biden is down at just a 25% chance, according to the Economist model, where Biden is down to a 25% chance in Nate Silver's model, where Biden is down to a 16% chance on the political betting markets. Maybe, even though a model might suggest this, they go against the grain. Because you remember that 538 also inaccurately predicted in 2022 that Republicans would win Senate control and dominate in the House, and neither of which happened. It does call into question, do we trust this model? Do we trust the one for Biden? Do we trust the one for Harris? Do we trust 538 at all? And that's something that will probably be a more high-level conversation for people in the White House, for people on both Team Harris, Team Biden, on Team Biden-Harris, to make that decision consciously. So I want to leave you with this. As we look at hypothetical scenarios between Biden, Trump, Harris, and Trump, I want us to be contained to just those two. I don't think it will be Gavin Newsom or Gretchen Whitmer or Josh Shapiro or Andy Beshear. There will be no pathway to the presidency for anybody besides Kamala Harris because of a lot of regulations that exist and that just aren't made to account for a potential swapping out of a nominee just 4 months and 1 day from the presidential election. It is very rare that even conversation of this does come through. It happened in 2012 briefly. It happened in 2016 with Hillary Clinton and her supposed health issues. These are things that typically come up for a week and then get completely thrown out. It has been a week. We'll see where we are in a week from now. It could very well be this way. Democrats have made very clear Biden is not dropping out. The Democratic governors have come behind him, national leadership has come behind him, and very few estranged Democrats have actually publicly said that Biden needs to take a step back and allow Harris to be the nominee. Even some have asked for an open primary. That's not going to happen. Harris either will be the nominee or won't be, but it is only and will only be Harris in any level of consideration for a replacement nominee. I also think at this point, if Biden was to meet that moment, it would have been 2 days ago, 3 days ago. It would have happened in the immediate aftermath of the debate, and it would have happened in heavy conversation with many top Democrats who would publicly also be calling for the president to take a step back. But they aren't. They are doubling down on Biden being the nominee. And so that makes me personally feel that this is more of a pipe dream for Democrats on Twitter than it is grounded in reality. Now, I could be proven wrong, and I'm sure many people want me to be wrong on this, but I do think as of right now, Biden will be the nominee for president in 2024 and will face off against Donald Trump this coming November. The question is, can Biden make up enough ground to win? It's not looking too great right now based on these national numbers and based on these statewide numbers, but crazier things have happened in American politics. I'm often reminded, too, that things like this have happened just 8 years ago on the Republican side in 2016, when Donald Trump saw the leak of the tape where he said the comment that we all know, the infamous comment about sexual assault. He made that comment. And what happened? All of a sudden, all the pollsters came out with 6-7 point shifts in favor of Hillary Clinton on October 8th and October 9th of 2016. When did the election happen? November 8th, 2016. A month later, despite the Wall Street Journal, which just showed Biden down by 6 nationally, showed Trump down by 14. We saw Mike Pence internal memos and internal conversations leaking to the press about Mike Pence considering stepping down from the vice presidential nomination because he didn't want to be associated with what at the time was seen as a failing ticket. And I'm not trying to draw a direct comparison, but I am going to remind you that conversations like these, while are rare, have happened, not exclusively on the Democratic Party side though, and sometimes it doesn't end up being correct. Things happen in American politics, and this is one of them. This is probably going to be the hardest time for the Biden campaign in quite a while, and potentially through the election. Biden can still win, but he isn't the favorite right now. 538 knows it, the polls know it, everybody knows it, but it's not beyond return. We will see what happens over the next 4 months. Biden could make a comeback, but Trump could also win it the way he is favored to right now. And that is a question for voters, a question for pundits, a question for the campaigns and how they operate over the next coming months to see, do they actually have what it takes to bring it back in? So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom right of the screen, top left of the screen, there's a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow. Happy 4th of July.